Hello, today is October 24th, 2008. We're meeting today with Bob Martin at his office in Greeley, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoofs. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Bob, and thanks a lot for sitting down to tell your story. Let's start out if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Okay, I was born 3rd of November in 1924 at Mitchell, Nebraska. And before I entered service, I graduated in 42. And Pearl Harbor, of course, happened in December of 41.
Do you remember where you were and
Yep.
when you heard about it?
I and a buddy were on our way home from church, and we heard the radio blaring as we stepped on the front porch of the house in Mitchell that the Japs had just attacked Pearl Harbor. And we both said, well, this is it. We kind of knew what our future was. Now, he joined that fall, right after he turned 18 years old. And I had tried unsuccessfully to join when I was 17. My dad wouldn't sign for me.
Yes, yeah.
And so after graduation from high school, I worked that summer for my dad, and he was a farmer beekeeper. And I worked that summer, and then that fall I went to Barnes Business College in Denver, hoping to pick up some typing and some other experiences. And I'd already tried to join the Marines and was turned down on account of my eyesight. At that time, they only took perfect people. So after my money ran out, after about 4 months in school, I returned home, worked for my dad that summer, and in the meantime, they lowered the draft age to 18. And my brother called up first, and he had a bad heart. And so I talked to him. He was working for an uncle of mine, and I talked to him, which still bothers my conscience. I talked him into going with Dad, helping Dad out so I could go into service. And when I got down to Cheyenne, I applied for what they call a voluntary induction. And when I got down to Cheyenne, they said we need a bunch of men to form the last battalion that they were forming for the Seabees, and the Seabees never consisted of hardly over 250,000 men. And so anyway, I joined, and they sent me to Camp Perry, Virginia.
Well, now, Bob, when you went to Cheyenne, did you go and enlist into the Seabees, or how did you get into the Seabees? Now, how did you come to choose that branch of?
Well, they give you several choices, especially if you volunteer. If you were just inducted, why?
And why that over, say, the Army Air Corps, the Army? You said the Marines wouldn't let you. I couldn't get. Why did you choose? I mean, here's a boy from landlocked Nebraska. How did he get into the Navy? I guess Navy Seabees.
Well, I just decided that would be a good deal, and they promised me with my education that I would get a storekeeper rating. Most of the Seabees were already men who had training in construction or related to construction.
Okay.
So they were going to make me a storekeeper, and which I eventually got to be. Took a little while overseas. But we went to Camp Perry, Virginia. If I remember, we left the 10th of October 43. And sometime after 30 days of boot camp, they took us up to topside, and we were supposed to go to Davisville, Rhode Island for advanced training. And they kicked about 8 or 9 of us out because they were over quota. And I happened to be one, put us in a repo depot. I thought, oh my God, here I am stuck the rest of my life. And anyway, we were there about a week, a little handful of guys, and they hauled us up to topside, big drill hall, and there were over 1,000 guys, and they were reading off train schedules, and I had spent all the whole $50 that I'd gotten, and so I had to borrow from Navy Relief, and I got a 10-day 10-day leave from Camp Perry, Virginia. It takes 3 days to get to Denver. So it was, hi, I'm here, and maybe a half a day. And I even left a day early, and I got back 5 hours late.
Oh, no.
The train was late making connections in Chicago, which caused me to be late to make connections in Cincinnati. And so I gets off the train in Camp Perry, Virginia, which was near the little town of Williamsburg, which of course is bigger today. And why they put the camp there, well, I know why they did. But anyway, they took my sea bag and all my clothes away from me and issued me POW clothes.
Oh, no.
Threw me into a camp down along the swamps of the York River on a woodcutting detail. They were harsh in those days.
Oh, jeez.
And I thought, oh my God, I'll never get out of here. And it was only about a week, and they took us up topside again, and I joined an outfit, and that was to go to Cape Gloucester, New Britain, where the Marines had landed on Christmas Day, and this was in January of '44, and they landed Christmas Day of '43, and we were to rebuild the airstrip and some other facilities on board a ship in New Orleans. Well, actually, Gulfport, Mississippi, pulled in New Orleans for a couple of days and formed a small convoy, and went through the Panama Canal and come out the other side.
What was that like?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I tell you, after we left the Panama Canal, it was dark by the time we got to the Pacific side. We were all alone. We were on a Liberty ship that had been built in Mobile, Alabama. It was brand new. It's called the Jean Lafitte. And we made that run at the South Pacific unescorted. And
Did you have any concerns about Jap subs and?
The first night out of New Orleans, we were going through the Yucatan Straits, and this is always, I've never been able to chase it down, but I was on topside, and a tanker was torpedoed or blew up, and they always said it was in the Straits of Yucatan, between Cuba and Yucatan. And I've got a history here that a fella was on that ship, and he tells about it. But anyway, they told us that we were entitled to wear a battle star for the American theater. And then they pulled it away from us. And then they'd give it back to us, and then they pulled it away. And my son-in-law, Tim, is researching now to find out. The government was very secretive. We could never find out what the convoy number was, or whether it was actually attacked, or whether something just happened in that tanker. It must have been carrying high-test gas, because, boy, I remember it was just like daylight, and we really hauled it out of there. But we ended up in Espiritu Santo, New Hebrides, and they decided...
Well, let me, sorry to interrupt you here, Bob. Let me ask you a question I seem to find from everybody that makes these sea crossings. I mean, here's, once again, a boy from landlocked Nebraska. How was that being on the sea? Did you get your sea legs? How was the crossing for you?
No problem at all.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah, it was a little rough. We had a little rough weather in the Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico, pardon me, not the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico. And then it was just like a sheet of glass all the way over to the New Hebrides.
You remember how long it roughly took you to cross that?
It seemed like it took us almost 30 days from New Orleans, because those Liberty ships were not fast.
Right. And then how far across the Pacific did it
I
take?
would say that's probably 8,000 miles. Anyway, when we got to Espiritu Santo, unknown to us, they decided that they were not going to rebuild the Jap airstrip on Cape Gloucester, New Britain, or put any port facilities in. And at that time, MacArthur had Admiralty Island campaign in planning, and so they took and just split over 1,000 of us guys into just units. I was thrown in on the 57th Seabee Battalion, and they had been overseas since April of '43. They'd been over for 10 months. And my second day off the ship, I was called to Commander Hardman's quarters, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done now? And Commander Hardman comes from an old Kansas family that had the Hardman lumber companies that was scattered all across northern Kansas, from Colby clear on over. I think there's still one left in Osborne. And he was a lieutenant, a destroyer in World War I, and then was in construction. And he built the highway between Minnetonka, Nebraska, and Mitchell. And he was a person who knew everybody. So he'd been going through the files of the guys, and my name was
I'll be darned.
Mitchell. So he, well, I see her from Mitchell, and he started naming who's who in Mitchell, of course, the town fathers who I knew. And he said, I had one particular friend I used to have a beer with every day that I was in Mitchell. And he was a little short Dutchman. He drove a Dodge car, and he wore a Stetson hat. And all you could see when he was coming down the street was the brim of the hat and two eyeballs. And I said, that could have been my grandpa Kurtz. He says, Henry Kurtz, that's the name.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so I was put on his staff immediately, which boy made me popular with the rest of the guys. You know, that old. But he was a fantastic person. And but I remember the meeting we had that I went with him to when we were going to reconstruct the Jap airstrip there on Laurengo and in the Admiralties. And McCain just blew his top.
Now when you say McCain, you're talking John McCain's grandfather, correct? Yeah.
He's the one that picked out where we built air bases all over the Pacific. And he was a hard-drinking ornery.
Is that right? Yeah.
Oh, he was. He left no uncertain ideas about where he stood on anything. But we just completely canceled that out. And
Had you already started work on it?
oh, some bulldozer work.
Okay.
But it was interesting. But I've got some pictures, well, I'll show them to you later, of what it looked like when we landed there. And it says here, what were the smells and...
Yeah, what here, once again, I'll keep coming back to this theme of this small town Midwest boy from Nebraska. I mean, now you're in these exotic locations. What was that like?
Oh, when we first hit Espiritu Santo in the Hebrides, that was a beautiful place. Coconut plantations, and I thought, oh boy, this was really great. Wasn't much over a week. And when we hit the Admiralties, the place was just all tore to pieces. The coconut trees were all shattered from shell fire and bombing, and all over were canisters of gas mask canisters and spent shells and clips of ammunition that were unused and helmets, and the Army did a good job of taking care of their own, burying their own, and I've got some pictures of the cemetery there, and but they just left the dead bodies of the Japs laying rot.
Oh, is that right?
Place. To this day yet, I can close my eyes and I can smell that. And so one of the first jobs us guys had was course, clean up the area.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you can say it on tape, but you'd put a rope around maybe one of them's two legs, and you'd drag them to a pit the bulldozers dug, and maybe the legs would come off. And it was, and whenever us guys, the 1st Cavalry Division hit the defended spots where the Japanese had their main defensive quarters and positions. And they just literally run the remnants back in the jungle. And then that campaign carried on from February 29th until May 14th, till it was officially closed. And whenever we'd get some time, us damn Seabees would put on our helmets and grab a carbine or a Thompson submachine gun, and we'd go out on these jungle trails and try and find us a Jap.
Is that right?
We
Oh,
were
geez.
damn lucky we didn't.
Yeah.
But I got a picture here of one of them, that one of the guys in our outfit, he was crossing a river souvenir hunting, and a native just got the other side and he pulled a dugout canoe up on the shore and hollered, "Japoni, Japoni," and they took off. And Herbert was kind of the joke of the battalion. And he had a .45, and he said he was shaking so bad he couldn't even get the receiver pulled back to get a shell in the chamber. And here this Jap steps out of the bushes and he says, "For God's sake, buddy, don't shoot." And this was this was sometime in the latter part of April. And found out he was an Nisai from Los Angeles that had been caught in Japan.
Okay.
And boy, he said, "I wasn't going to die for no damn emperor. I am an Episcopalian." And I'll never forget that. And he brought the guy back to camp. And I got a picture somewhere here of them bringing him in. Here it is.
Okay. We'll pull it out afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was one of the more humorous things that happened. But we were fairly well unmolested there, except the Japs did pull off a couple of 3-plane raids out of Rabaul. And there's quite a story about Rabaul, in that they flew everything out of Rabaul in early '44 because we had just beat them down then. And they flew everything out that'd fly, and they literally had thousands of gallons of aviation gas in barrels that they had buried. And these ground crews that they didn't get out, Japanese ground crews, rebuilt planes that we had bombed. And they made several raids, and including a torpedo one of our dry docks there. And we lost an ammunition ship, which is, there's the picture of it. Well, that's the one up there too. And there's still, we don't believe the Japs got it. We think it was probably carelessness, although a Japanese submarine commander, that's somewhere in these, I forgot the name of it, he laid outside the harbor and fired a long lance torpedo, and he claims he's the one that blew up the Mount Hood. But that ship went up, and there wasn't a single survivor off of it.
Mm.
And there were ships that were within a half a mile of that were, is this it or no, I can't remember. It was, but there was a repair ship, Mindanao, that serviced aircraft carriers, and that thing, my God, looked like it had been through a naval battle. There were holes all over in it, but there were...
Were you nearby that at all, or
Yeah.
within danger of that explosion, or
Well,
where were you guys?
Felt the concussion, but...
Wow.
And the warehouses along the waterfront, all of them had their fronts caved in just from the concussion.
That must have been something to experience.
But still, you know, the guys, especially in the Pacific, that really knew what war was, were the pilots who were flying every day during their tours, and the Marines and the grunts on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
This country would never tolerate another war like that because the casualties were absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
Well, to give you an idea, our outfit was around 1,000 men, and 360 of us were put into it after they'd been overseas for 10 months, and they never went through any battle experience or anything. It was all accidents and mostly tropical diseases. Took a third
Wow.
of that battalion, just literally, they shipped them home.
Did you ever succumb to any sort of tropical diseases or have any problems in that regard?
You know, I had malaria twice.
Oh boy.
But you probably know that 15% of the material and the men that the United States had went to the Pacific. In fact, we shipped more tonnage of supplies to Italy after Italy quit in '43 than we did to the South Pacific. And I was a storekeeper. I mean, it was, well, the first few months until the Philippine invasion came off, why, we never knew what a lot of supplies were. It was,
Is that right?
everything was hand to mouth. It was a tough place to be.
Interviewing a number of other Seabees, I understand that there was a lot of invention and a lot of making do with what you had and coming up with.
You know, there was a Seabee. He was a chief petty officer from Windsor. Was killed on initial landing on Los Negros and Admiral Allen Group.
Is that right?
And I forget where it is. I had his name down at one time. And I've got the darn many books from him. Subject that it's hard to find everything.
Well, you know, with the lack of supplies and such getting to you guys, how were living conditions for yourself as far as sleeping, eating, just general living conditions for you?
I would say the first 30 days, we lived in pup tents. And we had one, well, it was probably kind of a tail end of a typhoon come through, and it was the first few days we'd landed, and we'd encamped on this Japanese airstrip. And a surge of water came over, and we were just like a bunch of drowned rats.
You rode out a typhoon in a little pup tent?
Yeah. And when we left the New Hebrides, we hit a typhoon in the Coral Sea on a ship. It was Robert F. Elliott. It was a former liner Del Brazil that used to be on a run from New York City to Rio de Janeiro, and it was a big ship. And I think there were over 3,000 Seabees aboard that, plus some Army troops. And we hit that darn typhoon, and we had landing barges up on top deck, and bulldozers, northwestern cranes. And after 2 days in that typhoon, we had nothing left.
Wow.
And everybody was sick. And down below decks, it just sounded like that ship was tearing itself to pieces. But the wheelhouse was 35 foot above the deck, and the deck was 35 foot above the water level. And all the windows in the wheelhouse were smashed, so that meant we hit better than 70-foot seas.
Wow. Holy cow.
We had...
What was going through your mind during this period? I mean, were you scared? I mean, I can't imagine.
We were so sick that I don't think anybody would have even cared if it went down.
Oh, man.
And aboard that ship, they had just remodeled at the Kerry Troops, and they had the heads were kind of like a long sheep trough, you know. And on one end, of course, would be a pipe running out and wood platforms to sit down and relieve yourself. And these guys were sick, and a couple of them, their hats fell off, plugged up the drain.
Oh, no.
And here this crap was sloshing all over the road. And I don't remember anybody eating anything for a couple of days.
Oh, boy.
I was in 3 typhoons. That one on Del Brazil is what we always called it, so the Robert F. Elliott. And then that one that took us after we'd landed, and then in October we were flying between Kwajalein and Honolulu, and we hit a typhoon in a C-54 4-engine job. And boy, I'll tell you, that was the scariest of anything. Didn't last near as long. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, what was your responsibility on the staff then, when you got on his staff?
Well, Company B was known as a screw-up company. We had a Lieutenant Waite from I'm sure he's dead now, from Anderson, South Carolina. And he was buddies with the enlisted men. There was always a wall there that you didn't cross. But he played with a bunch, we called them the Georgia Swamp Rats. This was a southern outfit. And he played accordion with them. And after I got acquainted with Commander Hardman, he fired Waite, put Lieutenant Manuel in as Company B commander, and Chief Ryan as adjutant, and me as the adjutant's assistant, and we were all on Hardman's staff. And he said our job was to clean up Company B. Well, right before I got in, the company clerk, 2 guys had gone to Australia, caught an Australian plane and went there for 30 days or more, and he had them on a roster every day that they were there. But anyway, let's put it this way, we weren't very popular in the company for a long time.
What sort of things did you need to do to straighten them up? I mean,
all these guys were the most artful dodgers you ever seen. They knew every way on the face of the earth to get out of working. And we just had a right herd on everybody. Every morning I'd have to make sure that they'd left their, by this time we'd built a permanent camp area, lived in 16 to 16 tents with decks in them, and I'd have to go around and well, first we'd muster them, and then they were supposed to get to work, and we'd go around and check and see whether anybody was laying in their bunks, and a lot of times they just wouldn't show up.
Huh.
And but before too long, we had a pretty good company. It was a little rough road to hoe to be the skipper's buddy, you know.
Yeah, right, sure.
But it sure.
You were kind of in a no man's land, I imagine. Really, not in one particular group. You were, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was an experience. But you know, we built what was the largest base in the Southwest Pacific. Naval base in the Southwest Pacific. The entire Philippine invasion fleet equipped there. Everything from food to fuel to ammunition. We furnished it for them, and we did that in probably 4 to 5 months. And today you wouldn't get an environmental impact statement.
Right.
I looked at those men. A lot of those guys were in their 50s and 60s. Mid-30s and 40s was young, and I was a kid.
Yeah.
But those guys, you got to take off your hat to them. They were tremendous workers.
Huh.
pleasantly after some more unpleasant things.
Yeah.
But,
Well, kind of backing up, I should have asked this earlier. How was the transition for you from civilian life into military life?
my dad was a very authoritarian person. He lost his father in Russia when he was just 9 years old, and hated his stepfather, although I always liked the old man. I always thought he was a fair old man. But Dad was very authoritarian, and frankly, getting the Navy to me was freedom.
Was it
compared to what it was with Dad? I mean, and it wasn't that I was disrespectful. I was very resentful a lot of times. But he was a very authoritarian person. No, and I always had a bad. Well, my conscience always bothered me that I pushed Harry and gone back.
Well, why is that? Why were you bothered by that?
Well, Harry and Dad never got along.
Oh, okay.
Harry was a more passive type of person. And, well, just to show you, my dad, he was quite a person. He was during the war, you couldn't get anything. But in late summer of '43, after I talked Harry and had gone back, Dad leased him so many hundred colonies of bees, and then petitioned what was the ration board for a vehicle for him to be able to run them. And he gets a new 1941 Ford pickup, but Dad registered in his name, and Harry never had the keys. And well, Dad is a very difficult person, and there's probably reasons why I don't think I ever got bitter toward him.
Yeah, yeah.
Also recognize how I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. How? I guess while we're in this period of time, how was that before you entered the service, on the home front, as far as rationing and such? Once again,
well, the meat was very, very scarce, even canned. And I know when I went to school in Denver, I had to take my ration book to the landlady. I stayed at a rooming house, kind of a boarding house for students. On Colfax, Washington and Colfax. I wouldn't walk down that street today. Yeah. That was a nice, safe place. Yeah, but one thing that they were always envious of my dad about was, as a beekeeper, he could get practically all the sugar he wanted. And there's another story that comes from that. A lot of times, Southerners, I don't know whether they still do it or not, would have a few colonies of bees, and that's why they'd get sugar to make bootleg.
Okay, yeah.
I know a lot of beekeepers down there that were bootleggers. And you got 3 gallons of gas a week for a car, and now we had T-stamps. We had two pickups, 2 Ford trucks, and we had T-stamps on those. It was practically unlimited amount of gasoline you could get. And yet, Harry had a girlfriend, an older brother, and boy, if he made 2 trips 15 miles away, she lived at Lyman, a Zebra, Dad'd have a fit. Wasting gas.
Now, did you take a vehicle down with you to Denver, or did you just?
No,
yeah.
You wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
Nope, Papa. Rule an iron hand.
Wow.
And,
well, let's jump back over to back into the Pacific again, back to your service. How was it as far as keeping in touch with home, communicating back and forth to home, via mail, I assume, and how reliable was that?
We hated V-mail.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because you only had 1 page, and then they'd photograph that. You saw V-mail,
Mm-hmm.
picture, which brings me to a story. Hey, you ask in here whether I ever saw anybody from my hometown.
Oh, right, yeah.
My best buddy from grade school on, a fellow named Clyde Berry, was on the destroyer Cowell. And I get this email letter, and it wasn't photographed, and it said, "Dear Bob, I'm sure from this you know where I am." So I went down to the mail dock and asked whether the Cowell, destroyer Cowell, was in for its mail yet. And they said, "Well, no, the sister ship is picking up their mail and they're ready to leave." And so I went over there and I said, "Would you guys give me a ride over to Cowell?" "Oh, sure." So, and me, I was, well, here's one picture of me. Well, those are definitely not very Navy clothes. But anyway, I had on that shirt and a green ball cap that the Seabees had, and a pair of Army camouflage pants with big baggy pockets on them. And I goes from this one destroyer. I didn't, you know, when you board the capital ship, you're supposed to salute the flag and ask the executive officer or the officer of the deck permission to come aboard, sir. I just jumped on one, bailed over to the other one. First guy I saw, I said, "Where can I find Clyde Berry?" And he was a radar man. He said, "In the radar shack." And show how bright I was. I said, "Well, where's that?" And he says, looked at me like I had to be the dumbest person on earth, and he says, "It's right below the radar tower." So I found Clyde in there, and we were sitting and talking, had lunch together, and all of a sudden, about 2 in the afternoon, the boats and pipe prepare to get underway.
Oh, geez. Uh-oh.
And the executive, Clyde, was just panicked. He said, "How are you going to get off?" I said, "I never give it a thought." And so anyway, the executive officer comes walking along, and he was a sourpuss anyway, and Clyde told him my dilemma, and he jumps all over Clyde. I said, "It isn't Clyde's fault. I didn't tell him anything. I didn't tell him I was coming or anything." And pretty soon the skipper comes along, and he looks at me and he says, "What are you?" I said, "I'm a Seabee." And he said, "I should have known. What's your rating?" I said, "I'm a storekeeper." He said, "We're a storekeeper short. Make yourself at home. You're now with the fleet." And this harbor was about 26 miles long and 6 to 12 miles wide, and just packed with ships. And here we are. There was a little narrow passage which they could close with submarine nets.
Okay, uh-huh.
We're going through there, and I said, "Just give me a life jacket, and I'll swim ashore." And the skipper says, "Look back there, and here are Essex-class carriers, battle wagons." He says, "You wouldn't get 6 strokes, and you'd be chopped up into fish food." And we got out about a mile past the entrance of the harbor, and here was our garbage scow bobbing along. And I said, "Sir, that's our garbage scow out there. Could you pull over?" And he said, "I have never been so hurt in my life. You prefer a ride on a garbage scow instead of the ship of the line." And those guys, I would have missed a lot of action. They were among that bunch of tin can sailors that guarded Taffy 3, the aircraft carriers off Samar, when the Japanese fleet came through the San Bernardino Straits. It would have been quite an adventure.
Oh, yeah.
And
Was he serious about you staying on board, or was he just joking around with you?
he was serious.
Huh.
But he did pull over, and I jumped over on the garbage scow, and they pulled up the dock, and I'm walking up Main Street, and here Commander Hardman comes out of his tent and said, "My God, son!" I thought we'd lost you. Things that Clyde and I used to laugh about. Yeah. Hey, would you like some water or iced tea? Yeah, well, I think, did you catch where the commander stepped out of his tent.
Yeah, yeah.
But he's glad to see me again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, oh, that was, there will never again be anything comparable to what there was then. That harbor was just packed with ships.
That must have been a sight to see, with all those carriers and...
Yeah.
Wow.
I think they said there were 15, 16 battle wagons and around 30 Essex class, which was our big one then.
Now, this is the armada that was building to go up for the Philippine invasion? Okay.
And probably 20, 30 Jeep carriers. Most of those were built on Kaiser hulls, and some were built on cruiser hulls. Now, President Bush's San Jac was built on a cruiser hull. So was the Cabot. And there are a number of those, and they were sleek-looking carriers. So was the first Princeton, was built on a cruiser hull. It was the one that the first Japanese kamikaze and was used in the Philippines hit the carrier Princeton, and cruiser Birmingham tied up alongside of the Princeton and tried to help put out the fire, and the doggone ammunition blew, and there were more men killed aboard the Birmingham than aboard the Princeton.
Now, did you stay at that base then through the rest of the war, or did you guys move up?
By sometime after the invasion of the Philippines, the fleet was there. Sometime a few months before, Commander Hardman took Mr. Lieutenant Waite, and his exact words were, "I'm going to transfer him to a repo depot where his own mother won't find him." Well, Commander Hardman and Lieutenant Commander LaFrance, the executive officer of the battalion, had become acquainted with some French ladies in the New Hebrides, and had given them tires for their car, and possibly some other things. Wade gets somebody's ear and tells him, and the old man, the straight shooter he was, denied nothing. And they court-martialed him, broke him down one grade, and Paul LaFrance went from a lieutenant commander to a lieutenant and sent him home. And the Southerners in the outfit were just overjoyed at getting rid of that old slave driver. He was a tough character. And we got another commander in, and I was still on the staff. And one of his directives, first directive was, these Seabees, particularly the Southerners, would try and make their tents more like livable. They built decks around them, and what we would call lawn furniture today. And he said that gave me this order to put up on the bulletin boards, that he was not running a ramshackle tourist court. He was running a military establishment, and everything had to be GI. Whew. Then comes the next one. Everybody had to be clean shaven. And we had a couple of characters, one in particular, a Frenchman, a Spaniard, who'd fought in the Spanish Civil War. And his name was Cravatin, and he was tough. And he had a handlebar mustache and a goatee. And I'm putting this thing on the bulletin board, and he said to me, he says, "Martin, you tell that SOB he want my mustache and goatee. He come and get it. I'm not going to cut it off." And boy, he didn't. Well, Lieutenant Manlove told me, he said, "Bob, I can give you a pretty good recommendation to get you out of this outfit and get you a pretty good position." and it was closing out bases that we had left and shipping it going. He said, you've got good judgment. You're able to look at something and decide whether it's worth shipping out or not. In other words, make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Most guys in the service don't want to make a decision.
Right, yeah.
And I transferred out, and they sent the outfit home. And I'm just sick. I've been over there, well, just about a year is all at that time. And I thought, my God, I've missed a chance of going home on leave. And when those guys came back off leave, they were taken and put in as replacements in other outfits that were already overseas. We at one time were considered for a presidential unit citation, but the 40th Seabees got it because they had lost men in combat over in the neighboring island. And I don't care, we were a better outfit than they were.
Hmm.
Despite the fact that those guys were Southerners and prone to be very prejudiced. Well, one of the reasons that they didn't like the old man was there was a colored stevedoring outfit in our outfit on our island down in Espiritu Santo, and this was months before I joined them. And anyway, the shortest way to the outdoor movie was right down our main street. These Southerners had heaved chunks of coral and rock at those colored sailors. And the old man says, the next man that picks up a rock is going to do 30 days in a brig. He stopped it. So.
Were you segregated from?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the only colored people we had in the 57s were the officers' cooks. But the service end was completely segregated.
Hmm.
And probably not a pretty chapter in our life.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah. So primarily, your unit was made up of Southerners then?
Yeah.
How was that, I imagine you had never really come in contact with these type of people, Southern people, until you joined the service. How was that interaction? Did you get along with them, or how was
No, not at all, at first. I was always taught that anybody that was older than me, I called Mr. or Sir. And finally, Chief Ryan told me they were giving me a real rough time. I go around with work assignments and so forth. And he says, call him by their doggone last name, don't even call him by the first name. And he says, just be tough with them. And he said, they'll respect you. If they don't respect you, he was right.
Is that right?
Yeah. Out of over 1,300 people that were in that outfit, here was our last reunion, and I'm in the middle, and by that time they had made me commander of the 57th Seabee Association. In the 80s, we were able to track 200-300 people, and this was in 2007, October 2007, just about a year ago now. That was what was left. Plus,
that's a question I always like to ask. So after the war, did you keep in touch with guys from the unit, and talk a little bit about the reunions you went on?
And here were some of the old timers, same year, but most of those were daughters or sons or widows of former 57 Seabee people. They were just as loyal as could be.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of come to the point where I kind of got along pretty good with them.
Yeah. When was your first reunion after the war? How long?
The first one I went to was in 1983, but they'd had them since the late 50s. And one of the guys that started them was of West Virginia named Bill Smith. And sometime during his tenure as commander of the outfit, he brought a doctor's bag, like doctors used to carry on house calls, and and I've got it at home. And it says, to be opened at the last reunion of the 57 Seabees of the year 2000, whichever came first. Well, the year 2000, our commander then tried to open it, and it was kind of corroded up, being the southern temperatures and humidity. Took scissors and he cut open the strap and opened it up, and here was a fist of wild turkey.
Huh.
Well, by that time we were all old men, you know, and they rationed out some of the wild turkey, and I'm trying to, Elvin Williams was the commander's name, and he held the bottle up and it was 3/4 full yet, and he says, well, we better have another reunion next year. Next year. It was down a little bit more. Well, we better have a reunion next year. And when it got down about to there, a fellow named Bill Lucas from Americus, Georgia, who knew Billy Carter, knew the Carter family real well. My brother-in-law, who was an Air Force type, was with me. He said, Bob, he was a little Shorty, that's what they call my brother-in-law. He suppose you and I and Shorty could finish this off. So these suckers won't have an excuse to drag us back next year. We did.
You did?
And they gave me the empty bottle in the case, and I got it at home. But we still had 2 more. By that time, Bill had passed away.
Is there any plans for any more, or have you?
No, that last fall we decided with just 5 of us there, plus widows and orphans and so forth, that it just wasn't really worth it anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the way it is with most of these guys. We're getting to be a disappearing.
Sure.
And gosh, you know, my old skipper, Commander Hartman, passed away in 1955. And if you go through Osborne, Kansas, on the east side, I forget what the highway is, just this side of Main Street is Hardman Park, and here is a monument that his wife built.
Now, did you keep in touch with him after the war at all? Or?
Yeah, I saw him a couple of times.
Yeah.
And I saw Mrs. Hartman after he passed away, and she said that he just literally died of a broken heart because of what happened to him.
Wow.
But the Navy was strict.
Yeah.
And very, very strict. And I'm sure that he gave his girlfriend somewhere in a yearbook. I don't have it here. I've got a picture of the old man and his girlfriend at a Tonkinese lawyer. But Tonkinese lawyer, what am I talking about? Tonkinese laundry. The only shot I fired in anger was a short time on New Caledonia. I was a short patrolman. When I got sent down to close out the base down there, one of the first guys I run across was this boatswain first class who'd been in our boot platoon, a fellow named Akers, and he makes me a short patrolman. I had no training whatsoever. So one night they told me to go downtown. We were about 6-7 miles out of town, and pick up one of our sailors who'd gotten drunk and disorderly and was in the brig. And I'm driving along this Jeep, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the big, tall chief petty officer and probably 15, 20 little Tonkinese, we called them then, they're Vietnamese, surrounding him, and they were going to get him a girlfriend and so forth. Every once in a while, a serviceman would wash up on shore dead, you know. They had nothing good into mind for that guy.
Oh, jeez.
He was drunk, terribly drunk, and I backed up and drove down the street, drove right in the mob of them. And I said, Chief, need help? And he says, well, these guys are going to give me a girlfriend. And I said, Chief, you better come with me. And this one guy says, you just get out of here. I pulled out my 38 and I did they scatter? But that's the only shot I fired in anger.
So how long then were you closing out bases before you were finally sent home and or on your way home?
All during 45 until they signed, 2 days after they signed the treaty on the Missouri, I was put in charge of a 9-man detail of storekeepers that were supposed to be flown back to the States. And we flew from New Caledonia, a C-47, the old 2-engine Gooneyberg, to Guadalcanal, and got kicked off the plane there, and we were there for over 30 days. And until just a few years ago, I finally found out what happened. Why did they do that? It was because they had, when they started occupying Japan, they found so many of our prisoners of war that were malnutrition, wounded, and really just a step away from death. And they took everything and pushed it that direction.
Gotcha.
And about 30-some days after we were on Guadalcanal, a C-54 4-engine job came in and picked us up and some other guys, and we flew Kwajalein and refueled, and then that night we hit the typhoon. We flew in, dropped in at Johnson Island, which was just a little speck in the ocean, about 600 miles east or west of the Hawaiian Islands. And one of the guys in our outfit was a red-headed boy from McCook, Nebraska, who was Governor Cochran's nephew. And he refused to get back on board on the plane. And I told the guys, pick him up, drag him on. He bit and screamed and bit and kicked, and I says, drop him, boy. I still don't know what happened to him.
Is that right?
And another funny little thing, when we were taken out of Repo Depot and sent up to the drill hall, and this outfit formed that we went overseas with, we had an Indian boy named Macklin. And he was from either North Dakota or Montana. He was a Blackfoot. I don't remember him ever saying 2 words.
Is that right?
So anyway, they're calling off train schedules and everything, and he got the biggest smile on his face you ever seen. And in the Seabees, we had 2 sea bags. One you put your mattress and 2 blankets and a pillow and usually your steel helmet, that's a jet helmet there, on top. And then the other you had for the rest of your clothing. He took everything the Navy had given him, including his tin helmet. And I said, this is the last we're going to see of old Georgie. And they were calling his name for months. I don't know whatever happened. I suppose he headed for Canada or something.
Is that right? Now, do you remember where you were when you'd heard that we had dropped the atomic bombs?
Yeah. I've got some pictures here of when they finally declared August 15th as VJ Day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was a storekeeper at a place, well, we'd had it pretty well closed out, and we're just waiting. They were going to give us a liberty in Australia, which we never got.
Uh-huh.
War was over. What the heck? Why be nice to these guys?
Did you get much R&R while you were...
None.
None at all? What would you do for on your off time for entertainment and such?
Well, New Caledonia was the only place that I ever was in the Pacific that had a town with a white population. Now in the New Hebrides, do you remember the South Pacific? The Frenchmen took all their girls from 12 to 60 and put them over on another island, keep them away from the Americans. Well, it gets down to New Caledonia, my gosh, here's a town of 7,000 people, and French populated, but any nice girl wouldn't go out with usually. But I did get acquainted with a family that ran a hotel and bar there, and they had a sailing ship, and I went out sailing with them several times.
Oh, wow.
And I fell madly in love with their daughter. Her name was Anita, and she was half Polynesian and half French, just knockout beautiful. And but I never tried to correspond with her after I got sent home.
Did you, was there much interaction on your various locations with the local natives at all, or were you pretty much kept away from that, or what?
Yeah, that brings me to a story. You see me shaking hands there with the gentleman.
We'll get that on the tape here at the end.
Okay. Within a few days after we landed, now mind you, the 1st Cavalry Division, those guys lived with what they carried in their pack. And they had just taken a place called Rawson Village, and it's written up in several books. The Japanese, it was the highest point in the island, and they put several naval cannon up there, and that was where their command headquarters were. And we bombed and shelled that place for days till the 1st Cavalry overrun it. And this lieutenant came through our tent area, and he said, "Boys, there are several hundred people out there that are living under the trees. They're hungry. Some of them need medical attention." So little Chief Ryan and a guy named Fleener, who had some paramed experience, and I loaded up a Dodge 4x4 with, we had all kinds of stuff that we could pick from: medical supplies, food, K rations, C rations, clothing, and hauled them out there. And we made a couple of trips out there. And when Andy, my grandson, and I were there in '92 at Rawson Village, I asked the chief, I says, "I remember the chief who was here during World War II, and he had one arm, his left arm was missing." And he said, "That was my uncle." And he said, "You were here before?" And I said, "Yes. I came out a couple of times with food and clothing, medical supplies." And he says, "Oh, I remember you. One was a little guy with no hair. That was little Chief Ryan. And then there was a skinny guy, and then there was a fat guy, and you were the fat guy." I said, "No, I was a skinny guy." But,
isn't that something?
But we had quite a reunion. But that was the one thing that I feel the best about, that we were able to help somebody. And those poor people, the Japs did a fair job of trying to move the civilian populations out, but they eventually got to the point where they didn't care anymore. I could never, it used to just drive me buggy. How can anybody, they're here on these damn islands, there's no place to go home. Why don't they just give up? Instead of that, we just hunted them down like they were animals,
Hmm.
And they were right at 5,000 there in the Admiralty Island group, mainly on Manus and Las Negras. And I think we captured something like 20 or 30, and those guys were probably so sick and wounded that they couldn't have resisted, with the exception of the one that Herbert got.
So I guess along those lines then, you've since traveled back to where some of the places you'd been after the war then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's almost miraculous, the difference now. When we were over there, those people were, they were, the women didn't wear anything on the top. They were we thought as savage as you could get, and yet the missionaries had done a fairly decent job of educating some of them. But my God, here were people that wore loincloths when I was over there during World War II, running computers in the 90s.
Oh, right.
It was just something that was
and
almost unbelievable.
physically, it had recuperated from the war as well, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here is a picture. The top picture there is a picture of the repair ship Mindanao that was half a mile from that ammunition ship that blew up.
Hmm.
Doesn't that thing look like it'd been in war?
Yeah, that's something. Well, moving ahead then, we'll, so you were sent back to the States
It
for that.
took until almost Thanksgiving till I got back. And when we left from the tropical area, and I told them, just take a ditty bag with a couple of pair of dungarees and underwear and your dress blues. Ship everything else home, your pea coat and everything. So I gets off the train in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and it's got to be 30 below zero with a wind chill of probably 40, 50 below.
Oh, no.
And I don't even have a coat.
Oh, no.
I'd like to froze to death.
How did you get home from there then? Somebody come driving to get you, or how'd you make your set? Well,
I was on the second section of the Union Pacific Challenger out of San Francisco. And I'd called home and talked to Brother Harry, and I said, I'll be in Cheyenne according to schedule at such and such a time. And I'm on the second section. So when the first one comes in, don't worry, I'll be right behind them. So Harry and my mom and two little sis go down and pick me up. In comes the first section, in comes the third section, in comes the fourth section, and Papa says, we're going home. Depot agent, depot guy says, well, we froze up between Salt Lake City and Green River, Wyoming. We couldn't brush our teeth or have a drink of water. They pulled us over to the siding to get things thawed out.
oh, geez.
So that delayed us. So I called home after I got off the train, and Harry answered the phone. He'd just gotten back. And he says, I'll be down to pick you up, Bob. And I said, knowing how Papa was, the impatient type, I said, forget it, I'll hitchhike home. It was only 75 miles.
Yeah, but you weren't properly attired though, really, to hitchhike, were you?
And it ended up, I was standing out by the airport trying to catch a ride. There was no traffic, and shivering, and I went down to the bus depot and bought a ticket, bus ticket, and I'm sitting there just shaking, and I drank a couple of coffees, and here, Marine Sergeant who'd been in the South Pacific says, boy, you're in bad shape, kid. And he says, do you drink? And I said, not very much. And he said, well, boy, you need something to get some heat in your body. And we went over to Wrangler Bar, which is still there. And I knew nothing about anything but beer and whiskey, and hard liquor I hated. But my grandma, I remember, she liked whiskey sours. So I had a couple of whiskey sours, and man, I stopped shaking, went out to Best Depot, and the whole world started. And I got sick. And when I got home, my dad had a nose that he could smell anything. And he smelled the liquor on me. And I didn't get very... my dad never asked me one question. What did you do?
Is that right?
He just, as far as he was concerned, he lost me for damn near 3 years of work, and that pissed the hell off of me.
Oh, sure. Oh, huh. I'll be darned. Well, what about your mom? How did she ever talk about it? What she, with her son halfway around the world, about his worrying, and how did she handle it?
Mom was a tough little character with a heart of gold. I had two little sisters, the time I left, one was 4 and the other 10, and of course Harry would write to me. I don't remember my dad ever writing me a letter.
Is that right?
I did something that he didn't approve of.
I'll be darned.
Now, I don't think that he was anti-American or anything. I think it's just that he was selfish. But
so, aside from that, was it nice to be home? Finally back home? Yeah.
I wanted to go to school instead of that. I ended up, I think, probably because of Mom and the girls. My dad, in 1952, we had a farm up at Torrington, Wyoming that he sold, and he built a new home. We had moved out to northeast Nebraska, and I think it was $9,500 on it, and he wanted to be completely out of debt. And he talked my mom into selling that farm. We shipped out 7 carloads of honey that year, and he took every nickel that he could lay his hands on, and for months we never knew where he was. And it ended up that my brother, who stayed back out in western Nebraska, an older brother, I called him up and we formed a partnership with him and I and my mother, and she lived her life of dignity. But my dad finally, after months, we found out where he was, and my mom didn't want a divorce. She was one of those old-fashioned types. And that decided my future. And I left when I see now agriculture was changing. At that time I had the biggest personally owned outfit. I bought my brother almost 10 years before. I had 3,850 colonies of bees.
Wow.
And agriculture was changing. Center pivots coming in. And in northeast Nebraska, it used to just be a garden spot. Shelter belts, and they raised corn, grain, clover, or alfalfa in rotation. Well, pretty soon it's 100% corn, and I could just read the writing on the wall. Either I'm going to have to move with this whole outfit or get the hell out.
Right.
I decided to sell out and get out.
And then what'd you do from there on?
I'm in the insurance business.
Yeah.
I worked for 3 professions in my life. My dad, the Navy, and an insurance agency, and my son-in-law and daughter are taking over this.
I'll be done.
Everything's computerized, and I'm just like I'm less than computer literate.
Well, I will start to close down this interview then. Is there anything that I didn't ask you, or any stories that you wanted to add that we forgot to talk about before we kind of wind this down?
Oh, you said about some characters I met. 2 of them stand out in my mind. One of them was with that group that I went overseas with. He ends up in an outfit that had been overseas about a year, and servicemen are unusually hard on replacements.
Yeah.
You either die or you survive. And they were given, I don't even know his first name, but his name is Taylor. And they're giving him a hard time. He says, "Oh, hell, when you guys are still in boot camp, I was with the 6th Seabee Battalion on Tulagi, which was our first landing across the straits from Guadalcanal." And after that, he was known as Tulagi Taylor. And I run across him again down New Caledonia after about a year and a half. And then there was one in New Caledonia, well, the skipper of the outfit there in New Caledonia. He would get guys that had been hospitalized, were in an outfit, hospitalized with appendicitis or malaria or something. And he just grabbed them, that was it. And I had this guy up at the main gate. His name is R.J. Critney. He was an Irishman. And this was during a short period that I was a shore patrolman. And when an officer would drive in, they had a front porch on this guard shack, and he'd do an Irish jig and give him a fancy salute gypsy. Everybody knew he was the nut. When our skipper would come in, his name was Commander Dowd, I dare say this, it ain't too bad, but he'd say, "Oh, Fuzzy Balls just drove in." And this one day, there were two guys down at the shore patrol shack that answered the phone. One was the old boatswain's mate, Akers, and the other was a warrant officer, Haney. And he'd been in the Navy forever. He was a lovely old man. He picked up the phone and this Critney says, his usual term, he says, "Oh, Fuzzy Balls just drove in." And he says, "Who is this?" And Critney says, "Well, you damn fool, you ought to know who it is. You put me up here," thinking it was Akers.
Oh.
And I just happened to be at the guard shack, or the shore patrol headquarters, and having a coffee or something, and Haney comes out, he just beat red in the face. He says, "Martin, you go get that man's replacement and get him down here." And I said, "What in the heck did you do?" When I got up there, and he says, "Well, Akers asked me, 'Who is this?' And he says, 'I told the damn fool, you put me up here, you ought to know who it is.'" And I said, "My God, that was Warrant Officer Haney." And by him, "Well," he says, "maybe I'll get back to my outfit now." Didn't work. And just about a week later, Admiral Calhoun come through for an inspection. And I'm there in my whites in the Jeep. And here they come around the corner, big old Packard flying Admiral's flag. And he, "No, please don't." He comes flying out on that porch, did his Irish jig and his salute. And this commander comes up to my Jeep and he is red in the face. He says, "You go get relief for that guy. We're staying here until you do." And I went down and got relief for him. And I said, "Critney, if they don't shoot you, you're going to be lucky." And I never did see him again. I don't know what happened to him, but I think he got back to his outfit or something.
I'd asked you where you were on VJ Day. Can you describe what that was like that day when you heard that Japan had finally surrendered?
Enormous relief. No one, well, I get almost emotional about it. It was like being on death row and getting a reprieve. But the place where we were to go into was Ariake Bay on the southwest coast of Japan.
So you were slated to be part of the invasion
Yes,
then?
I was to be with the Beach Battalion of deciding what they needed in the line of supplies, ammunition, gas, hospital stuff or what. In other words, prioritize everything. And that was a big horseshoe-shaped bay, and there was one road that went up the top, and the widest beach was only about 100 yards. And they had taken and dug tunnels all over the whole ring of that island and put steel doors on them so that they could open up the doors, fire off a couple of shots, and then before we get to range, they'd close the doors.
Now, were they preparing you for what you were going to expect? I mean, years later we knew that they were going to fight to the death. I mean, were you aware of what you were going to go into?
I always thought they did a pretty good job.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Because they didn't hold too much back from us.
Okay.
We knew about I don't know how the grapevine worked, but we knew the first day, and Iwo Jima was several thousand miles from where I was stationed. We knew the first day.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
It was a bloodbath. And of course I had friends that were there. And one Marine, in fact the guy I tried to join the Marines with when I turned me down I got in my eyes, he went in and his first operation was the Cape Gloucester operation. He was 1st Marine Division, and then Peleliu, and then Okinawa. But anyway, he used to write the most insulting letters to me because I was a storekeeper, and he'd say, "What are you going to do if you ever run across a Jap Girl Scout? Throw typewriter ribbons or pencils or what?" I was fishing with him in 1990 up on the Columbia River, and he says, "Bob, I've had something that has been bothering me for over 40 years. Do you remember how I used to rag on you about being a damn storekeeper?" I said, yes, I remember it quite well. And he said, "Well, the first day I hit the 1st Marines, General Rupertus, who'd taken over from Vandegrift, looked at me and he says, 'You know, Miller, you're a good, strong Nebraska farm boy. You're going to carry my radio.' And he said, 'I carried that damn radio all over the Pacific.' And he says, 'You know how damn close to the front lines a 4-star general got.'" So we both had a good laugh about it.
Well, you'd said earlier when we were talking, getting back to the invasion plans, that you'd spoke with somebody that kind of analyzed what would have happened had you gone. Can you talk a little
Our
bit?
intelligence was pretty good. We knew what units were there and everything else. I don't think we had a idea about the depth of preparations, although we should have known after Okinawa and so forth. But I want to show you just a few pictures of Raval.
We'll definitely get those on.
Okay. But they were great tunnelers. They took their miners and everywhere, like in Peleliu and Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they tunneled all over those places. You could burn them out on one tunnel, and there'd be offshoots of that they'd spring up on the other side of the hill. And you know, for both, and I had for a long time, I found it hard to even be rational in my thoughts about Japanese people. And you get over that eventually, because those people were fighting for their homeland.
Yeah.
And,
well, you know, there's always, for years now, been the discussion or the controversy is whether we should have dropped the bombs in the first place. Now, someone that would have been on the invasion had they not been dropped, your thoughts on that?
that would have been terrible.
Yeah. Well, you'd mentioned
both sides.
And you'd mentioned just in your own situation where you would have landed. You said you talked to somebody later about what they anticipated it was going to be like. Can you talk a little bit about that? What they said, what they told you?
Well, they said we'd never made it off the beach, this lieutenant commander. He said not for days. He said it would have been a bloodbath because one road up and 300-foot average height on the cliffs. And actually the Marines were on the other side of the island. They were to take a place called Kagoshima, and actually they had some beaches to land on. But you know, those people really honestly believed that this was the end of their civilization. And you can understand why they would fight the way they did. We would never, this country would not stand for the losses we took for those damn violence.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously a great sense of relief on VJ Day for you,
Oh,
knowing
yeah,
that it was over and you'd made it through the war.
You
And
bet.
yeah. Well, one last question I always like to ask is, how did that period of your life play into your life, affect your life, change your life, or did it even? Or was it just 3 years out of your life? How does that play into your overall life or life afterwards, do you think?
I, I think on the whole it was a positive thing because it, it I learned to take responsibility and use my head, and it was great. It was I was actually in only 31 months, but it was well spent. I've never ever regretted it.
Yeah.
And man, I went through a couple of times where once right before the war ended, I was running a forklift. In those days, they didn't have the cage, you know, and had loading boxes of 20-ton hydraulic jacks. And the chief told me, and I was a storekeeper, and I was volunteering just because we wanted to get that base closed and go to Australia.
Mm.
And anyway, the chief says, back out of the driveway so you won't dump the boxes. Well, if I wouldn't have been numb from tiredness, I'd have thought, well, there's only one way those damn boxes are going to go if I back out, and that's on me. And at the last minute, a guy from Texas named Smith jumped on the doggone running board, and there were 2 boxes higher than the backing on the forklift. And anyway, they came down, and I got my left cheekbone smashed, a skull fracture, and I never had a filling in my head until then. And all my teeth were cracked and broken, and it was not. And they told me at the time, if I'd known about it, I'd have whipped him. Chief DeBon's complaining because I broke the steering wheel on his forklift. And one other time, in 44, in August 44, I got in a hernia in March. And the commander kept saying, we've got sick people, we've got wounded. My God, you're a goddamn pencil pusher. That was his exact words. You're all right. We'll get to you one of these days. And make a long story short, an intestine got strangulated, and boy, I was one sick guy before they finally got around to operating on me, and that was in August. March, April, May, June, July, August. Now that's quite a while to wait.
Oh boy.
And at the time, I had, the incision and stitches kept breaking open, and I had malaria and infection in that. And years later, gosh, almost 50 years later, Dr. Bruns operated on me for a hernia on that same side, and it was the third one I had in my life. And he said, how in the heck did you stand it with that nerve caught up in your, and well, my dad always, when I got home from the war, I learned how to fly, but he wouldn't let me go on the GI Bill because he said that was like going on the WPA.
Oh, jeez. Even though you deserved it.
Yeah, you can imagine. Those old timers were different. Boy, they were. But anyway, I never complained about it. And so almost 50 years later, why, Dr. Bruns and a VA, nurse up at the hospital in Cheyenne says, well, you should have been receiving disability. So I've got the letter somewhere around here, and they said I was between 60 and 80% disabled because I had to lay. I never got a decent night's sleep. My leg would.
Oh, jeez.
And anyway, just so it was, yep, I was disabled. However, they remedied that, and they don't go back and pick up any of the past.
Has your malaria ever bothered you since?
Oh, not too much. I had a few sieges out northeast Nebraska during the summer, but I had fungus clear up into the 50s, both under my arms and on my feet.
Wow.
But that stuff just literally eat people. That was not a good place to send people, I guess.
Well, as we end this interview, then, is there any last statement you'd like to make to close out this interview about anything? Any final thoughts you'd like to tell anybody watching this tape?
We were amateurs compared to the service we have today. Those guys are professionals. One of them probably can do more. I know one plane can carry as much as a squadron used to. They're different, but we overwhelmed the Japs and the Germans with just sheer material and numbers. And while that doesn't take away from the bravery of a lot of those guys, I wouldn't want to have been a tank. A Sherman tank, that was not the world's best tank. Some of our equipment was good and some it wasn't. But I have a tremendous amount of admiration for people like, that are gone now, like Joe Foss. And I often wonder about those guys in submarines. My God, yeah, just going into a submarine, it gives me claustrophobia.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I want to thank you for spending the time to sit down and tell your story today. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you. Ready? These are some of the hundreds of tunnels that the Japs dug in at Rabaul. And when the war ended, we never invaded the place. There were over 100,000 Japanese troops there. And we never landed on the place. They just sat there, and that was one of MacArthur's let them wither on the vine routines.
This was during your trip?
Yeah.
Okay.
The landing beach that we landed on sometime in the latter part of March of '44. And there is a picture. This is the Japanese airstrip after a couple of weeks of rain.
Looks like you're up to your knees in mud.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you describe this picture, Bob?
Pardon?
Can you describe this picture here?
That's a picture I had taken after I got home. It was taken in December of '45. That's my macho picture. I have my Marine khakis on and a .45 on my hip.
Is that when you were doing shore patrol?
No.
Just
This is me and the chief of Rossum Village, a village that I visited during World War II.
And you said this was the nephew of the chief you had met back then?
Yeah.
Huh.